There are young people across the world facing a tough choice: continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
Is this the tether?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams have some defensive issues to clean up before the playoffs. They gave up a 16-point lead in the fourth quarter last night in Seattle and a game-winning 2-point conversion in overtime. The result was a dramatic 38-37 win for Seattle. Breakdowns by the Rams defense overshadowed spectacular performances by Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua. Stafford had 457 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Nacua had 12 catches for 225 yards and 2 touchdowns. Seattle now has the number 1 seed in the NFC playoffs. The Rams can get it back if they win their final 2 games and Seattle loses their last 2. The Rams finish up at Atlanta and at home against Arizona. Seattle plays Carolina and San Francisco on the road. The Lakers are 12-3 on the road after their 143-135 win at Utah. 45 points for Luka Doncic. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Happy holidays! This holiday season, KBLA Talk 1580 wishes you and yours joy, peace, and prosperity. As we celebrate with family and friends, we're already looking forward to an exciting first quarter, packed with must-attend events to kick off the new year just right. In January, join us for our inaugural Brotherhood Brunch, bringing together community leaders, change makers, and everyday people for inspiration and connection. February means it's time for our signature Black History Month luncheon, a powerful celebration you won't want to miss. And in March, Women's History Month, we're once again hosting our State of Black Women in Los Angeles Symposium and Luncheon, addressing the issues that matter most inside our community. From all of us at KBLA Talk 1580, happy holidays. Stay tuned for more details on these incredible upcoming events. KBLA Talk 1580, your voice, your community, your power.
KBLA Talk 1580. It is time for Freedmen Friday. We do this the second hour of every single Friday on this radio station. Dedicate the time to reparations. We aim to have a comprehensive conversation, all walks of life, all philosophies, viewpoints, geographical regions, and mindsets. We want to be part of making sure we all know what the heck is going on and that we can therefore become part of the momentum, part of the solution, part of the work that is needed to get reparations across the finish line, city by city, state by state, county by county, and eventually nationally and internationally. Hopefully not that eventually. I'm being joined now by a reparations activist out of Baltimore, Maryland. He is someone who's been working on this particular issue that's in the news for quite some time, ever since the governor vetoed the Reparations Commission, and actually before that as well. He is part of an organization called Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. He's a researcher and an activist who is also a podcaster. He's got over 70 podcast under his belt. He's got 15 years of research and policy advocacy experience, working with community organizations and researchers to use that work to drive social change towards community self-determination. Lawrence Grandpre, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so tell me the story of what happened from your perspective. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with California. We've had 2 reparations legislative fails. We had one where our legislative Black Caucus failed to bring the bills to the floor. And then the one that they did get through, the governor vetoed. This year we had the governor veto everything except a measure that many consider a stalling tactic. Tell me the story of what happened in Maryland as you see it.
Well, again, thank you for having me. So a few things to set context for your audience. Maryland has the largest Black caucus in its state legislature, in our state capital, Annapolis, of any state in the country. So I believe it's like over 30 of the lawmakers, almost a third in a state with almost a third of the population of the state of Maryland is Black. So reparations has been something that people have been talking about for a while, and we actually came to a meeting with some of the folks in the governor's team, and this would have been in 2024, so before the 2025 legislative session started. We passed all of our laws in 100 days in the state, from January to April, so it's a mad dash. But Before then, we came not with a study bill. We came with an actual plan for taxation and through progressive taxation of people with wealth and certain closing of loopholes to actually get money for reparations, and actually put that in the bill in 2025. The governor's team said they didn't think that was the approach they wanted to take, so we actually pivoted as a compromise to a study bill. Study bill was never our intent, but there were folks in the Black caucus who stated they were getting interest from people in their districts to do a study bill, so we pivoted after, again, the governor's team said they were not interested in the comprehensive reparations funding bill to the study bill. And again, the governor said they weren't a fan of the reparations policy as we framed it. They never said explicitly they were totally against the study bill until the bill was basically right on the finish line in March.
Wow.
We started to hear rumors that the governor's team were calling people saying there was a public story that said, let's do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission instead. And we're like, Truth and Reconciliation is not reparations. You know, we come from a lineage of a Pan-African organization where some of our people have critiques of Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa,
right,
and how it was used in some ways to obfuscate material land reparations in South Africa. So that was not as much of a interest. It's not the same as reparations, right? So we started to hear rumors after them trying to kill the bill, and then they said the bill may be dead, and then we heard, we're just going to pass it. And what happens, happens. Not really thinking he was going to veto it, but the governor did. The bill did pass in 2025 in March and April, and then the governor vetoed it in April. So in the state of Maryland, you can override a veto if you have a 3/5 of the legislature agree to override the veto. And so that bill passed with more than 3/5. A big enough margin to override the veto, but governors have a lot of power. This is a Democrat majority state, Democrat veto-proof majorities, Democratic stronghold, and a powerful Democratic governor can put pressure on people to stick with them and go with their opinion on the veto override. So we heard rumors about the governor leaning on folks. The governor announced he was thinking of supporting people in primary challenges in the Democratic primary.
Wow.
To support people that the governor thought really represented his agenda, and one can read between the lines in terms of potentially targeting people who he saw as pushing policies that he didn't agree with or made him look bad. So there was a lot of pressure on the Black caucus to stand firm, and to that credit, just this week, the Black caucus did stand firm. We got over 60% of veto override majorities in the House and Senate. So as of Tuesday, in a special session, because again, this is December, not January, this is a special session because our Speaker of the House actually stepped down from being Speaker. So they had to come into session, and by law, whenever you come back into session, you have to take up all the veto overrides. So they took up all the veto overrides. One of them was the reparations bill. So it's official. Maryland will have a reparations commission to study not just the harms of slavery, but concrete plans for material redress for those harms in the state of Maryland.
Now, you see this as a victory? I mean, the reason I'm asking is because you said you started out asking for a comprehensive taxation and, funding bill that would actually start moving money into reparations, and you compromise with the study bill, and then that was vetoed, and now the veto was overridden. Is that a victory?
I believe so. I believe it's an example of the Black Caucus standing firm against pressure. And not all study bills are the same. So the governor has certain arguments he's used to explain his veto. Some of them, I think, make sense from the outside looking in. So one of his arguments is that the study is what you do when you don't really want to act. We don't need to study. Studies are often a stall tactic. Let's just act. So again, I think that the fact that his team was not interested in a comprehensive funding taxation bill shows the action thing. Maybe he wasn't interested in acting. But to take his study point seriously, this study is not just designed to be something we put into the public, have a press conference, and put in a drawer. It's specifically designed to look at mechanisms of repairing the harm that can do things like stand up to, the constitutional attacks on race-based policies. There's so much in terms of how you actually pay for reparations that people just kind of say, we'll figure it out later. Well, no, we want to figure it out now. And we have some ideas about how to fund reparations bills here in Maryland, but to get those funding mechanisms across the finish line, people and lawmakers have legitimate questions, and you need research to answer those questions. So if we're going to, for example, we're thinking about pushing a proposal to make people like Johns Hopkins, who's been very exploitative of our community, be it Henrietta Lacks cells or Johns Hopkins owned slaves, though they claimed he didn't. He got money from the railroad, the B&O Railroad, which used slave labor during the Civil War. But the specifics on those things is stuff we need to have clarity on to make the case that someone like Hopkins owes. How much do they owe? How much should they pay? These are all questions we can answer with a study, not just for the sake of studying it, but to push concrete reparative policies that can actually move money and make these policies stand up to public criticism and constitutional scrutiny. So I think, again, not all studies are the same. This study uniquely, I think, is very important. And I think it's uniquely important to show Black folks that we can demand the time and space to study not just our oppression, but solutions to our oppression. So I think it is a win.
Yeah, and what, I mean, you said the governor was talking about, or, dropping hints that there might be primary challenges to some of these lawmakers if they supported this, and doing what governors do. Governors have a lot of power, especially when it comes to lawmakers, legislators, because they have to sign anything that they create into law or not sign it. But I know you guys were doing some counter lobbying and counter organizing. What kinds of stuff did you do? And I'm asking for a friend because, here in California, there was so much disappointment about our governor's vetoes 2 years in a row around reparations.
So one of the things, again, we're not a nonprofit. So we are a think tank that operates from an explicitly Black nationalist, Pan-African nationalist framework. And part of the reason we can do that is that we have a business model that includes people that give us money every month, but we do fee-for-service research and consulting gigs. We don't get money from large foundations, and we can be directly engaged in the political space the way a lot of nonprofits legally can't. So we spend a lot of time going to Annapolis and working specifically with our Black Caucus, which when we started doing that work over 10 years ago, a lot of people said, they're reactionary, they're conservative, they don't work together, they don't have power. But over the past 10 years, the Black Caucus has really, part of that national shift, the party, Democratic Party shift and left, but part of it is an intentional effort to engage and organize them around a variety of issues, be it funding for grassroots organizations that do violence prevention, be it around issues like reparations, be it police reform, to really give them, like we're a think tank, so we do what think tanks do. We help provide research, we do testimony, we give them bills to sort of show them, like, you can actually do this work, and we'll hold you accountable if you don't. Like, we'll go into your district and we'll talk to church groups, and we'll talk to community groups when you do poorly, but we will also talk positively about you when you do well. And so because we can be directly political, and we go to Black civil society, church groups, community groups, groups that are already organized in the Black community, that already have political engagements, that tells them what the lawmakers are doing in the state capitol, which oftentimes can be so hidden, we've been able to help organize a Black caucus, which has traditionally been unorganized and really a rubber stamp for leadership. So I think them standing up to leadership and the governor in this moment, I think it's a culmination of a decade of work on our part and the part of a lot of our folks that we work with, especially like police accountability advocates, people, mothers of murdered sons and daughters, just pushing the Black caucus to think independently. Because if the Black caucus in this state, at least, Maryland, stood up, they can basically run the state legislature, but they oftentimes act like their hands are tied. They can't act. They can't move. So I think that it's an intentional effort to create a grassroots movement to really demand accountability from the Black Caucus. And that's really what's critical to our, I think, success here in Maryland. And I think in general, there are progressive caucuses, there are other groups of people who traditionally have been lukewarm on reparations, like a lot of our progressive leftist folks. You know, we hear rumors, they see reparations as kind of a distraction and things like that. And so we've worked really hard to engage our progressive leftist allies as well to say this isn't about identity politics. This isn't about deflecting from material redistribution. This is economic redistribution. What is taxing Hopkins and redistributing that money other than progressive economic redistribution? And
I mean,
you all
and it's also a debt. I mean, and it's also a debt, to be fair, which is, you know, you can call it a distraction easily if it's not owed to you. The Real Friday Jones is in our chat. She says, I'll be reading the Maryland legislation to form an opinion on it. We must also ask what role the DNC played and how Maryland moved with pressuring legislators. We can look at that when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DePrima when we come forward.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with the world. African Focus Incorporated is a community-based organization whose mission is to bring Africans and African Americans together, lead charitable initiatives on the motherland, and educate people from all walks of life on the beauty, legacy, and opportunity of Africa's 54 nations. And it's that time once again when African Focus is teaming up with KBLA Talk 1580 for our 8th annual African Focus Trailblazers Tour. Travel with us in 2026 when we're headed to the southern African nations of Zambia and Botswana for a historical, cultural, and vacation tour led by me, Dominique DePrima, Cultural Ambassador for African Focus Incorporated. Enjoy luxurious accommodations, conscious fellow travelers, shopping, adventures, cultural tours, wildlife safaris, and a giant waterfall, one of the world's 7 wonders, along with a chance to be of service at an orphanage on the continent. Become an AFI trailblazer by exploring the motherland with a nonprofit organization that has members in Africa and America to help roll out the red carpet for you, and together we'll make a difference and have fun doing it. For more information, visit africanfocus.org or call 310-676-7300. That's 310-676-7300 or africanfocus.org. Whether it's stateside or exploring the diaspora, we're with you every step of the way. African Focus and KBLA Talk 1580. Come go with us.
KBLA Talk 1580 congratulates Malik Books on celebrating 35 years in business.
It's a celebration.
Malik Books proudly houses one of the largest African American and diverse children's books in the nation. This is the perfect time to pick up holiday reads, meaningful gifts, and to support literacy in our community. For 35 years, Malik Books has stood strong in the Black Book Revolution, uplifting stories that heal, inspire, and transform. One reader at a time. Change your thoughts, change your life. Books are the gift that keeps giving. From all of us at KBLA Talk 1580, congratulations to Malik Books on 35 years of culture, pride, and community.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DePrima on First Things First.
Talking with Lawrence Grandpre. He's the Director of Research for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, a think tank, not a nonprofit, but they've been organizing around reparations and looking at this historic veto override that happened, overriding the governor's veto of this reparations study bill. Friday Jones, who's actually a.k.a. Kansa Muhammad, a reparations advisory commissioner here in the city of Los Angeles, where we're broadcasting from. She's asking about the role of the DNC in pressuring lawmakers there and sort of putting their fingers on the scale around reparations for the state of Maryland.
Yeah, so I don't know about the DNC specifically, but I'll talk about some of the larger dynamics at play. Now, the the governor has continuously said he's not running for president. However, right after the veto happened, he was in South Carolina, which was one of the key primary states in the previous Democratic primary in 2020, giving a speech with, Jim Clyburn's fish fry. So this is someone who I think it's fair to say objectively is moving in a way to position himself to keep open the window to run for president. There is a feeling amongst many that though reparations was seen as something you could gesture to in 2020 when a lot of the primary folks in the Democratic primary for president had a plan, most of those plans were just funding for nonprofits and sort of more traditional Democratic policies called reparations. They weren't truly from a Pan-African, Black nationalist, like Black sovereignty perspective reparations. They were just funding for nonprofits. So a true reparations approach, I don't know, is genuinely popular in the DNC crowd. And certainly if you're trying to run in the moderate lane of a presidential election in a Democratic primary, there's a feeling that supporting reparations would hurt you, especially if you were trying to be a moderate in a Democratic primary. So in a world where Wes Moore is a military guy, Wes Moore calls himself, sort of a pragmatic capitalist, but with a heart, he's seen as more of a moderate. So there's a feeling that if he were to consider running for president, this reparations proposal, if he would have supported it, some people feel he may think it might hurt him, which may explain the veto. Right. So in the world where there's a backlash to quote unquote wokeness, reparations is seen as part of that sort of woke policy. There's a feeling that some National Democratic Party folks may be influencing, or at least the national politics is influencing the veto decision, which is why we thought it was important to get the override.
Well, we can see this opinion piece in the Washington Post supporting the governor. It kind of feels like the fruit, him reaping the fruit that he sowed by that veto, because they're saying that the editorial board, and this was in yesterday's Washington Post, says Wes Moore is right about reparations. But to me, it's pretty, okay, from my perspective, flimsy. I'd love to hear your reaction, because they say, first of all, they're saying because the Democratic supermajorities in the state legislature overrode his veto, unseemly and illogical arguments about reparations will once again be litigated in public. That's their first argument. Their first point is, he was right. We don't want all these illogical arguments to be made in public. And then they go on to argue that Maryland has white residents that aren't rich. And so why should they be on the hook for sending reparations to, say, Prince George County, where Black residents are doing well, have some wealth? I think that is one of the worst arguments I've ever heard of. I can't believe the Washington Post printed that. So what you're saying is that if you owe us a debt, but we're doing all right without it, you don't have to pay it?
Yeah, the Washington Post is not only owned by Jeff Bezos, multi-billionaire owner of Amazon. They've explicitly stated that they want their op-eds to only support pro-capitalist positions after Trump won in 2024. Right, so we can understand the incentives they have, but I think that argument reflects a pretty common perspective on reparations, that it only can reflect stealing or taking property from people that currently have it, i.e. white people, and giving it to Black people. So this is the idea that a Black person's coming to take your house from you and give it to a Black person, right? If you're white. This is ridiculous, right? This is a caricature. And that's what people do because of the anxiety of, slave revolts. Maryland was right next to Harper's Ferry. So you got John Brown, you got Nat Turner. There's a specific anxiety in Maryland around Black people having forceful advocacy to talk about slavery because we were a border state. We were not Confederacy. We did not secede, and we did not have Reconstruction here. So Maryland desperately wants to forget that it had slavery. We praise Harriet Tubman. We praise Frederick Douglass, but had to flee Maryland in order to do their advocacy. Maryland is south of the Mason-Dixon line. It is the South. But because of the Northeast Corridor illusion, Maryland continuously tries to sink itself out of the history of slavery. So just to kind of wrap up, I think for us, we have done other things around reparations. So we actually wrote the part of Maryland's bill that reinvested tax revenue from legal cannabis sales into communities impacted by the war on drugs. So there's already existing war on drugs commissions that control millions of dollars of revenue throughout the state of Maryland to do reparations for the war on drugs. And that, I think, is an example of the type of reparations policy we want to scale up with this commission support. So they're going to look at investments like community-based violence prevention, cooperative housing, housing outside of the market, not just sort of nonprofit grant programs, but investing in cooperative business, wealth building, things that can build people's cultural and political ability to build their society up. And that's what reparations is for us. A lot of people are focused on cash payments. We're not exclusive of believing some cash payments might be part of a reparations plan, but the core part of us as a Pan-African organization is building community-accountable, community-controlled, community institutions to meet the needs of people to sustain themselves, protect themselves, and advance themselves civilizationally. That's the goal of reparations. And even in places where people have like some black home ownership, that's what was hollowed out. That's what has been systemically attacked throughout our history, not just because of slavery, but because of Jim Crow, because of the war on drugs, because of the nonprofit industrial complex, as well as the policing industrial complex. So it's building up those community institutions. That's what we need in PG County. That's what we need in Baltimore City. And that's why I believe we need a reparations commission.
So, but you're not saying you guys would be against individual payments or checks, are you?
Not against it. I think for us, for our organization, where we have a degree of expertise and focus, is getting public dollars to community institutions. So be it, the grandmother in the community that does youth programming, that doesn't have a nonprofit status and doesn't know how to write a grant, right? Or has been denied grants systemically from racist foundations, right? Like, we have institutions here in Baltimore, like the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund, that was built after the Baltimore uprising in 2015 to repair the hollowing out of community institutions, because people like that have not been funded for decades in this town, right? So I think it's looking at things like that, because if we give reparations, we need community institutions for people to invest those dollars in. If we give cash donations, what is the black businesses that can keep the dollar in the black neighborhood? What are the black institutions that we can invest in so that money just doesn't go to private schools or go to rent or go to Starbucks or Walmart? Like, we need to have the community institutions that can serve alongside any infusion of cash into the black community. So I think for us, it's that both and approach that we feel is really important. We know that our particular expertise is in the community institution building perspective. But I think the Reparations Commission is very clear on studying and figuring out, like, what is the specific land that was taken? Like, Maryland has the Chesapeake Bay. There were black oyster people and black water people that were literally, like, lynched and kicked out of the state because they were getting wealthy working on the water. Baltimore had the largest population of black freed people in America pre-Civil War. Like, what is the mechanisms of racial terror that got their land taken? I mean, we invented redlining in Baltimore City. Like, what is the mechanisms of land theft and block busting that force people to buy homes at higher rates? There are all these historical places where investments in redress economically may make sense. We want to figure out how to do it effectively, how to do it constitutionally. But on top of that, we need institutions that can serve to build long-term sustainable political power and meet our needs beyond the length of any check.
Fahima called from D.C. and made a passionate argument about why another study wasn't needed. We'll address that and more when we come forward. We've got news, traffic, and sports right here. Then more with Lawrence Grandpre, Director of Research for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle out of Baltimore, Maryland, in the wake of the governor's veto of the Reparations Commission being overridden, and now that commission will be seated. All that straight ahead on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Bree Wood with BIN News Now. President Trump is declaring victory in his first year back.
When I took office, inflation was the worst in 48 years, and some would say in the history of our country.
In a primetime speech, he slammed former President Biden, touted a booming economy, falling car prices, and promised troops a warrior dividend of $1,776. Kamala Harris says Democrats are stuck in the past. On Jamie Harrison's podcast, she blamed the party for giving lip service to listening, but ignoring new voices. Harris urged embracing fresh perspectives and vowed to campaign hard to help Democrats retake Congress in 2026. And A$AP Rocky is turning heads with the new official artwork for his long-awaited album, Don't Be Dumb, created with legendary filmmaker Tim Burton. The cover blends Rocky's past album themes with Burton's signature dark style. Get BIN News now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Right now, there are young people across the world facing a tough choice: continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
Is this the tackle? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams have some defensive issues to clean up before the playoffs. They gave up a 16-point lead in the fourth quarter last night in Seattle and a game-winning 2-point conversion in overtime. The result was a dramatic 38-37 win for Seattle. Breakdowns by the Rams defense overshadowed spectacular performances by Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua. Stafford had 457 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Nacua had 12 catches for 225 yards and 2 touchdowns. Seattle now has the number 1 seed in the NFC playoffs. The Rams can get it back if they win their final 2 games and Seattle loses their last 2. The Rams finish up at Atlanta and at home against Arizona. Seattle plays Carolina and San Francisco on the road. The Lakers are 12-3 on the road after their 143-135 win at Utah. 45 points for Luka Doncic. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
In a city as big as LA, healthcare shouldn't feel far away. That's why Cedars-Sinai is breaking down barriers and bringing resources like free screenings, vaccinations, and wellness programs into local communities. From Leimert Park to Lincoln Heights and everywhere in between, Cedars-Sinai is showing up, partnering with over 200 local organizations to improve access to healthcare resources. Because care doesn't just happen inside a hospital. It happens in neighborhoods and places around the city where we live, work, and grow. Cedars-Sinai, here for LA.
When you turn to the Employment Development Department, we'll help you get there. Whether it's support for you and your family while you find a new job, or the resources to focus on your recovery after illness or injury, we can help you move forward. From support while you bond with your newborn, to helping serve your family while your partner serves our country. Your EDD. We'll help you get there. For more information, visit edd.ca.gov.
1 year ago, flames tore through Altadena and Eaton Canyon, changing lives forever. From the ashes, can a beloved community rise stronger? Hi, I'm Dominique DePrima, host of First Things First, weekday mornings, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. here on KBLA Talk 1580. And I'm inviting you to join us on Wednesday, January 7th, as we broadcast live from Perry's Joint on the 1-year anniversary of this horrific and devastating fire. We're remembering those we lost, celebrating the heroes and sheroes who answered the call, and honoring the resilience of neighbors who are determined to rebuild together.
I've been a strong black woman a long time, and I can't just break down now.
Hear the stories of survival, the voices of recovery, the spirit of community that the fire couldn't destroy, and yes, the angst of those who still do not know where they go from here.
Yeah, where am I go?
At KBLA Talk 1580, we don't just cover the story, we're part of this community, and we've done our level best to hold those responsible for this fire accountable. And 1 year later, we're still standing together.
It is my hopes that black people will rebuild those homes.
So join us live at Perry's Joint, 2051 Lincoln Avenue in Pasadena, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Wednesday, January 7th, as we commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the Altadena Eaton Canyon fire. Because some stories demand to be remembered.
This too shall pass.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate meets a scholarly match.
Yes, indeed. It is Freedmen Friday. One of the legislators there in the state of Maryland quoted as saying that in this time of attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, attacks on affirmative action, the commission becomes the Maryland Commission, and the overriding of the governor's veto becomes even more important. The mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, signing an executive order Monday to create a task force there focused on reparations. This is continued momentum, I would say, in the face of blistering opposition from the federal government and an environment on the national scene that seems to be pretty hostile towards anything that helps Black people. Is that part of why this is important? How much of a role does that play in your view?
I think that's part of it. I think for us, the goal is not to be reactive, but to be proactive.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, again, we're Democratic Party stronghold. The last time we had a ambitious potential Democratic president come out of Maryland was Martin O'Malley, and he initiated a regime of over 700,000 illegal arrests in Baltimore City. So those on the Democrat side, right? So part of this is be very explicit to hold folks accountable. Folks who are claiming to represent a liberatory approach for our folks. We need to have a standard to actually have our people have a North Star for what liberation actually looks like. For example, one of the things the governor touts as his version of reparative policy is this thing called the Enough Act, which targets historically redlined communities for competitive grant funding, $10 million a year at most. Part of the value of a study is just to explain to folks that $10 million a year is so woefully inadequate when you understand the scale of the attacks upon our people. And he can do fancy press conferences, or Democrats can do big community events where people are crying and dancing and doing whatever off this $10 million a year grant cycle. But to show people not only the level of violence done to our people, the scale of the stuff, but to show them a concrete plan for how we're actually going to get to repair. I think most people is yeah, the study's going to say we owe $1 billion, $1 trillion, but it's never going to happen, so what's the point? I think for us, the goal is to be very explicit, because moderate Democrats are going to make legitimate arguments that say anything we do is going to be attacked in the courts. So this study is to show people, here's how we're going to defeat the court's attacks. And part of the value of that is to deflate the talking points from moderate Democrats, who's yeah, I support reparations in theory, but we can't do it this way because it's going to get overturned. It's no, that's not true. That's a talking point you use to do nothing. And the study has the value of getting time and research and specifics to undermine those moderate Democratic arguments to push local Democrats to the state level to pass policies that, if we allow them to, will be dismissed as impossible, Pollyanna, and unconstitutional. So I think that's really the value of the study, is to push back against moderate Democrats saying, I support this in theory, but that's nothing we can do. Or the things that we're doing within the current political arrangement are sufficient and basically are reparations. If you understand the goal is not just to fund people, but to invest in their self-determination and capacity to govern themselves, that's very different than a grant program. That's very different than most of the stuff that was held up in 2020 as reparations.
The conversation that I referenced with Fahim out of D.C., who's a long time, I think, reparationist. I know she is, actually. She says that there's already a study, the Maryland Slave Legacy Project, that is just repetitive, and maybe it's because the activists that work on this are younger and they're not familiar with this Maryland Slave Legacy Project, that the work has already been done.
Yeah, so the Senator for Baltimore County, Charles Sidnor, actually, he gave a specific response to that argument in his speech on the floor of the Senate on Tuesday for the veto override. He explained that part of the distinction was that while that study was explicitly to categorize the harm of slavery, it was not focused specifically on solutions, building the case for solutions as this study is. So this study is designed explicitly to build upon that study, and also the recent Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission study, which did just come out a few weeks ago. The goal is to build those historical analysis into an explicit case for repair. So, for example, anything any policy that's presented on reparations will be taken to the courts. Ed Bloom and his attacks on the Fearless Fund, the conservative legal movement, it's not a question of if, but when we are sued, right?
Right.
So part of the value is like, if we are going to do cash payments, many people do say they want to do cash payments. What is a way to do cash payments that would achieve the result of giving people money and be able to sustain legal scrutiny? So one thing we've talked around the LBS as researchers is we know a lot of our people in Maryland their families were not enslaved in Maryland. We are a northern migration state on top of being a slave state. So a lot of our families were enslaved in North Carolina, South Carolina, and came up for the construction jobs during World War II. So what are the mechanisms of redress that would actually meet the needs of Marylanders families? So it may not be only a slave lineage in Maryland. One thing we talked about is, what if we looked at families who went to segregated schools? So if you can prove your family went to a segregated school in Maryland, we have the studies that show the longitudinal differential in earnings potential because of that evisceration of our educational capacities, and that could be the grounds for cash payments. Now, to say on top of that, what we know, reading Derek Bell, reading the history of integration, is that part of the violence done to our schooling systems wasn't just the denial of funding, but when they integrated, all those black teachers that had done that incredible work in those segregated schools were not brought into the integrated schools. So on top of cash payments, for me personally, part of reparations looks like, how do we have an educational system that honors the cultural legacy and the self-determination and the ability to have black teachers teach black kids curriculum relevant to their history and culture. So to me, you have to combine both of those things. And that's what the study allows us to do and show with specificity, not just the arguments for cash payments, but building the case for institutionally building out black people's capacity to govern themselves, teach themselves, care for themselves, and build institutions that can defend the black community in the future. So to me, that's the unique value of this study.
The governor now is saying that he's looking forward to moving forward and that he will cooperate. Is that a good sign?
Yeah, I mean, I think folks that know the governor better than I do, I don't know him personally, he seems genuinely committed to trying to do good things for the black community. He just has a theory of political change that is very much limited by his understanding of traditional Democratic Party politics, right? So, there are people who say, well, if you call it reparations, it's never going to pass just because of the frame reparations makes people scared. And if we had believed that, we would have never fought the youth jail that O'Malley wanted to build to lock up kids charged youth as adults, that we stopped that. We would have never fought police reform, repealing the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights in Maryland, something they said was impossible. They said reparations for the war on drugs was impossible. They said the youth fund was impossible. So if we accept the political limitations set before us, that's not my job. My job is to push and to extend what people believe is possible within that democratic political party process. So I think we cannot accept preemptive surrender in terms of the limits of what people who explicitly don't care about our people's liberation define as politically palatable, pragmatic, or possible. Our job is to extend the boundaries of the political pain they suffer for not responding to our community's needs to make the impossible possible, i.e. in their self-interest. So if they don't do something, they're going to keep getting hammered, right? So I think for us, that's the political theory of change.
I mean, and the fact is that they're always going to say we don't have money for it. That's what we're hearing. San Francisco just voted to create a reparations fund, but they didn't put any money in it, and that's what we're hearing in California. Oh, yeah, well, we have a task force and we have these great bills, but we don't have any money for it. So that's the other, roadblock, I suppose, that, is part of, aside from people's presidential ambitions. We have the same thing with our governor here in California. There's always the we don't have any money, and what we discussed earlier, which is, there are white poor people, as if we never should fund any reparations until there are no poor white people. I'm not sure what one has to do with the other, but I do think these things influence public opinion when it comes to reparations.
Absolutely. I think part of the value of this study is that the state archives are the institution that hosts the study. We've also just had 30 more years to accumulate information that can go into the study. Like when the previous study was done in the 90s, we didn't know Johns Hopkins was a slave owner. Like, that's new information. So there's all this new information that we can use to say archive uniquely to build a case for this time. Now, to your second point, again, I think part of what entices people to reparations, and some people, and what repels others, is this notion of almost like revenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you harmed me, you have to recognize my pain, and you need to make it better. Now, I think for us, revenge is for religious individuals or people. That's not my goal. My goal is who got the money and how do I get the money where it needs to go. So that's why I'm not focused on, like, we can not have a reparations Gestapo shaking poor white people down for nickels and dimes that we're going to send to the hood. That's not how this works. That's why we're talking about institutions like Hopkins. Hopkins has a $13 billion endowment. That endowment made $4 billion last year. So just their money made $4 billion in new money last year. So when we talk about Maryland being an affluent state, one of the richest states in the country, even in the midst of this budget deficit, there are institutions here that have clearly benefited, not just from slavery, but Jim Crow, gentrification, blockbusting, exploitative medical research. That's just a small fraction of a tax on an endowment for someone like Hopkins or someone like the Gold Sector Foundation, who got their money through things like blockbusting in black neighborhoods, real estate. That would produce over $100 million per year with just a small tax on those endowments. So those are the sorts of policies. It's not about poor white people. It's about rich white institutions. It's about rich white companies that use tax shell games to avoid relatively moderate state business taxes that would bring in, again, the billions of dollars in revenue to the state, a policy we put before the Moore administration in 2024 to fund reparations, and they said we'd rather focus on the Enough Act, right? So these are sort of policies, pragmatic material policies that are focused on not just redistributing money between black and white, but redistributing power between the people who have accumulated it, the elite institutions and businesses, and community institutions and neighborhoods that have been historically aggrieved. So I think that's the real reparations frame, and part of why we focus so much on building up the capacity of communities and institutions rather than like an individualistic, almost like American individualist frame of individual people, individual payments, individual suffering, individual redemption. Like, again, we think that individual payment portion could be a critical part of what this Reparations Commission will study. But I think for us, our big focus is how do we empower communities that have been devoid of power? Because if you give us the power, we'll get the money. Right. So I think it's really redistributing power to communities.
Lawrence Grandpre is my guest. He's the Director of Research for Leaders of a Beautiful Study out of Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, in the reparations spotlight this week following the override of Governor Wes Moore's veto of the Reparations Commission. That commission will now be seated. We've got more questions, more conversation. It's a Freedmen Friday only on KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DePrima when we come forward. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminds you that we keep us safe. Every girl deserves a chance to shine. That's the belief behind Forgiving for Living, Inc. Since 1999, this organization has been empowering at-risk girls ages 13 to 18, helping them overcome behavioral and mental health challenges. Founder Wendy Gladney's personal journey inspired the mission to give girls hope and purpose through the power of forgiveness. Through their ambassador program, workshops, and annual conference, Forgiving for Living has touched over 3,000 young lives, providing mentoring, life skills, training, and tools for building self-esteem and confidence. You can make a difference. Visit forgivingforliving.org to donate, volunteer, become a mentor, or find help for a young girl in need. Forgiving for Living, Inc., building brighter futures for young girls. Visit forgivingforliving.org today. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
The holidays can be a time of increased stress for those struggling with opioid or stimulant addiction. They can also be a time for pause, reflection, opportunity, and new beginnings. This holiday season, choose treatment and recovery. Embrace the company of family and friends and create special moments. Find a proven opioid or stimulant addiction treatment provider near you at choosechangeca.org.
Ready to order?
Yes.
We're earning unlimited 3% cash back on dining and entertainment with a Capital One Saver card. So let's just get one of everything.
Everything?
Fire everything. The Capital One Saver card is at table 27, and they're earning unlimited 3% cash back.
Yes, Chef! This is so nice.
Had a feeling you'd want 3% cash back on dessert.
Ooh, tiramisu.
Earn unlimited 3% cash back on dining and entertainment with the Capital One Saver card. Capital One, what's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
You got a big mouth. Hello, Joe, you're up. Welcome.
We're unapologetically progressive, and we don't black down.
We do not. It's a Freedmen Friday, and in conversation with Lawrence Grandpre out of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. He's the director of research there in Baltimore, Maryland. The veto has been overturned. The governor says he's on board to work with y'all. You guys seem like you have your plan in place. What is next? What happens next?
So one thing that people need to understand is that the veto was overridden, but the timeline that was in the bill doesn't change. So the bill says we need to have recommendations out by 2027, but because of the veto, we lost like 6-7 months of time to do the study. So one of the things we have to do is we have to get the commission and panels as quickly as possible. So there are certain appointments and criteria about what the makeup of the commission will be, but we need to make sure that that is paneled as soon as possible, that we engage the state archives to see what capacities they need, find ways to fill those capacity gaps, and begin the process of things like community outreach and plan to try to produce results. Because the idea is that if we get this done by 2027, by 2028, then the Maryland General Assembly is supposed to debate and potentially take up the recommendations for legislative change that will come out of the study. So again, it's one of those things where we need to get going as soon as possible, understanding that we've lost, 6-7 months of time. Wow. Just because of the veto, right? So I think it's one of those things where we need to be sure people understand that, so that if people understand if we need an extension or if to make sure the work isn't rushed, but to understand the time crunch was produced not by like any failure of the commission, but by this inherent time crunch put in by the veto, but not let that be an excuse not to do the important work with as much detail and specificity as possible. Again, build upon all the things we've learned from the last study 20, 30 years ago about Maryland history.
This is a huge panel, 23 people.
Yeah, it is not a small undertaking. And as I'm sure you understand from commissions all over the country, this work can be very emotional. People can have strong feelings and factions can emerge. So I think part of it's going to be folks like us and other folks in the community that really see this work as important, speaking as much as possible that we don't have to agree on everything, but within any individual group's particular focus or perspective or what they find is important, them do as much good work in that area as possible to build upon the stuff other people want to bring to the commission, so we can have a document that reflects a variety of approaches and perspectives, like a playbook, knowing that we're not going to be able to run all the plays, knowing that we're not going to agree that we should run all the plays, but to have as much options as possible, as opposed to being boiled down that this is the solution. There is one solution that looks like this, but having the variety of perspectives brought to the table about what material approaches to take. Because again, the goal is to use this as a document to influence legislative recommendations for the Maryland General Assembly coming out of 28. And I think that, again, that would be really helpful. Looking at, again, the attacks on government, Maryland's very susceptible to several budget cuts. So mechanisms that redistribute money and wealth and power to communities impacted by those budget cuts and by potential weakening economy, the role of AI, hollowing out the workforce, it's going to be more important than ever to materially benefit Black folks, not just create this as a document to say we did it.
So one of the things the Washington Post says in their opinion piece, backing up the governor's veto, they say that Maryland already apologized in 2006. I want to combine this with Molly Bell's question. She asked, has any government admitted that reparations is owed to descendants of enslaved, i.e., Jim Crow and other harms? I would say California, because by seating a commission, aren't you admitting it, or no?
There's an admission that there's historical harms that needs to be studied. Now, one thing other folks have said is that apologies or studies do not put the state on the hook for any reparative policies. Mm-hmm. So what we've done with the study is state that there's a harm that needs to be evaluated and then produce recommendations for potential redress. It's not a commitment from the state that redress is justified or necessary or sufficient. That saying it would be great, but it's always going to be a question of the political power to force them to follow through on it.
Yeah,
right?
that's what we're seeing in California. We seated the first commission in the country, and now we're looking at what does it really take, though, to take the recommendations of a study and actually implement them in real reparations, not things you were doing anyway that you now want to slap a reparations label on.
Exactly. And to have solutions that operate at the scale of the suffering, but also recognizing that we may not have a $10 billion check next session that goes out to black folks. So that may not be what this looks like. But to not allow things like that being difficult preclude the ability to do what we can do. Because like I said, invest in people whose families have been impacted by Jim Crow segregated schooling systems, or, again, putting more money into the bodies. We have reparations commissions in Maryland right now that control millions of dollars in resources through the Reparations for War on Drugs legislation we passed. What if we put some more investments into those bodies that operate at a local level under local control in the communities most impacted by the war on drugs? That's just another example of something concretely we can do in the short intermediate term to take that from a $10 million pot of money to a $20 million pot of money in the communities most impacted by the war on drugs. We can do that right now. And let's really focus on doing things like that, but also having that vision towards the larger scale of repair to deal with the harm of the suffering.
We've argued on this Freedmen Friday space many times. I have conservatives, folks in the reparations movement who really truly felt that Trump or the MAGA Republicans might hand us some wins on reparations. Haven't seen it. I noticed the Maryland vote is almost exclusively along party lines. It is along party lines. You have one Dem that voted no, right, on the override. So do you see any hope for getting bipartisan support for reparations? No. It's obviously in this moment, the culture war has infiltrated the Republican Party to the point where even though, this is about property and about violations of our property, of our lives and our labor being taken from us, you would think conservatives would care about that in the abstract. But in the context of reparations, their love of property rights kind of disappears into the ether. So unfortunately, we're going to have to focus on not just pushing Democrats, but again, really leaning on moderate and conservative Democrats. There are folks in Maryland that would be Republicans in most other states. But because of the Democratic hegemony, there are moderate Democrats like Dahlia Tarr, who's a senator from a majority black district in northwest Baltimore City, married to Laney James, that, are going to be critical, skeptical, and not want to go forward, but won't overtly say, I don't believe in reparations because they need black votes. Right. So it's going to be our job to really push those moderate Democrats, black and white, to show them this isn't about virtue signaling or woke politics. It's about materially improving communities. And if you don't support that, you don't support improving communities, right? It's not about reparations at the abstract only. I'm going to rush you a little here. We got 60 seconds. How can we help? What do you want to leave us with, Lawrence Grandpre? So go to our website, lbsbaltimore.com. We produce podcasts, research documents, and analysis that explain our perspective. One thing we'd love if you are in a state that's going to legalize cannabis, we have the Reparations for the War on Drugs plan that we think is basically like a starter kit or a build-out for potential more expansive reparations policy. It's not either or. So if you're in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Virginia, states that are legalizing, please hit us up. Check us out on YouTube. We're on the Black Liberation YouTube Media Network. We have 2 podcasts, In Search of Black Power and Political Commentary Corner. So check those out, and if you want to contact us, look us up on LBS Baltimore on any social media site. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation and the great work you guys are doing, Lawrence Grandpre, leaders of a beautiful struggle. Thank you. We'll be hearing from Afrocentric comedic scholar Ashra Kwesi. It's a blockbuster conversation. That's next on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Bree Wood with BIN News Now. President Trump is declaring victory in his first year back.
When I took office, inflation was the worst in 48 years, and some would say in the history of our country.
In a primetime speech, he slammed former President Biden, touted a booming economy, falling car prices, and promised troops a warrior dividend of $1,776. Kamala Harris says Democrats are stuck in the past. On Jamie Harrison's podcast, she blamed the party for giving lip service to listening, but ignoring new voices. Harris urged